So today we're going to fit 5 610mm sliding mirror fronted wardrobe doors into a recess in a 1897 Victorian house. So the ceilings and walls quite often in older houses are out by a little bit, so we've got to take that into account. Anybody who tells you you can fit these wardrobe doors in the odd hour is fine if you've got a perfectly accurate aperture to fit them into, but if you haven't and you've got to create one, then it does take several hours longer, even if you have a reasonable amount of experience. So set yourself aside a good day to set things up, and then you're under no pressure. In this instance we've gone for a deeper wardrobe, but the minimum is really about 650 mil from the inner edge of the rail that guides the doors, and that will give you room for a formal suit or coat on a hanger. The main thing is to set the first, or the top rail, in place first of all, and then you can, once that's all been established, then you can settle the lower rail, the floor level, directly onto the floor, having put a door in place and adjusted the positioning of the bottom rail with the use of a spirit level to ensure that the door is upright in all directions. As this is a Victorian house, I'm going to fill up the space between the top of the doors and the ceiling with a timber framework I'm making up out of 100 by 50mm kiln dried timber. You'll find probably that 75 by 50 is perfectly adequate as long as it's kiln dried, and so it doesn't shrink too much. At the moment I'm having to do this on my own, and so what I've done is I've put two little temporary support pieces of wood on the wall. They've been attached with screws and plugs, so they're very solid. And then I've put the beam across there. In my case it's 100 by 50mm, checked it against the spirit level at the correct height for the height of doors that I'm using. And then what I've done is I've measured the gap between the ceiling and that piece of wood, which does vary quite considerably. I've chosen the narrowest gap, and I've cut little noggins of wood. And these noggins have been cut to the desired length using my cut-off saw, which I'm very fortunate to have because it means we can cut them to an accurate length, and it means that they are square. So once all the timber work is screwed together, hopefully it will be solid and square, and it'll enable it all to run correctly, or let the wardrobe doors run correctly. Whichever method you use to saw your noggins, whether it's with a handsaw or with a power saw, it's best to start off with a nice square cut, which either you can create yourself with a set square, or you can see on the end there's the markings of when that came out of the factory, so hopefully that is square, should be. And I don't know whether you can see on there, but I've put an M on there, so that's my master block. So basically I measure all the other blocks from that, and then hopefully they shouldn't be much deviation in them. Now what I'm going to do is to carefully take down that timber, which is just resting on those two temporary supports, and then I'm going to fit my noggins to that, and then I shall fit another piece of, in my case, 100 by 50mm to the top of the noggins, and that will form the basis on which I screw into the ceiling. Part of the reason that I've gone for a wider wardrobe in this instance is that hopefully the top rail will now line up against a ceiling joist, so it'll make a more solid piece of construction. But the main thing is to make sure that there are no pipes or wires in the way of anything you drill either into the side walls or to the ceiling. Right, and here's the frame that I've been making up. What I've done is I've pre-drilled, I don't know if you can see that in there, probably not very easily. Oh, there you are. Pre-drilled it in the ends so as I can drill through with the power drill more easily, and then push the plug and screw through and screw it into the wall so that it's secure. And then we'll secure the top rail to the ceiling joist. I always put the ceiling rail in first, and then this rail, which is attached directly to the floor, we've cut the carpet back, as you can see, because it's better if it's secured to the floor direct, because it saves any need to messing it about, and maybe if you change the carpets later on you don't want to disturb the wardrobes. So that goes in after the ceiling one, and then you can adjust it as required to get the doors absolutely vertical so as they run nicely. Not sure whether you can see, but I'll try and focus in a bit more. It's a bit better. I've drilled with a metal drill bit for drilling through metal. Holes along the rail at about 500-600mm centres. These are probably about 600mm centres, basically so as they fit into roughly the centre of a floorboard to make it a bit more stable. And then the screws at the end, I've just brought those in slightly by probably about 100-120mm, something like that. I've cut the top rail to length, and as you can possibly see through there, maybe, yes, you can just see the sun shining through the hole there. I've drilled holes in both of the channels, about the centre of each channel, at about 500mm centres, and then those will be screwed into the ceiling frame that I've made, the little framework that I've made. And then they go all the way up to the end, and the ones at the end I've brought them in by probably about 50mm from the end. Here we are, just like that. Bear in mind that although the runners on this top rail and the bottom rail are equidistant, the actual top rail is a lot wider because it obviously has to overhang the doors, because when the doors are centralised on the runners, then they hang out a little bit, so this bit here has to be a bit wider to the front, so don't get caught out by that difference in width. Hopefully now you can see the discrepancy in the ceiling. There's quite a big gap at either end, probably about 25-30mm at one end, and probably about 18-20mm on this right hand end. Hopefully our little structure will even out that disparity in the ceiling and allow the track to run level and straight. Fix the rail to the underside of our timber work using 30mm number 4 screws into the holes that we previously drilled. And those are about 500mm centres, something of that order. Here we have two of the doors in place. We fit the doors on the back part of the rail first. So in this case I'm going to put 2 doors in the back rail and 3 doors on the front rail. And then what we need to do is to, on the bottom of both of those doors are adjusters, which you just adjust with a screwdriver, and then get them all nice and level so as they all close tightly together. Hopefully towards the bottom of the doors, you can see that there's a wider gap at the bottom to what there is at the top. So this is why we need to adjust them on the rear adjusters on the wheels at the back bottom of the mirror doors. Although the floor and the floor rail and the ceiling rail are reasonably level, it only takes a relatively small amount of these doors are from Wickes, and you just literally gently push the top connectors into the rail, and there's quite a bit of room for adjustment, and the adjustment basically comes at the lower level where you've got the wheels, and there's an adjuster on either side, and you just use your screwdriver to screw them down and get them level. So you just screw the screw in until the doors become level with each other. Also, hopefully you can see at the top here now, there's a bit of a gap you can see between the white top rail and the white edging on the mirror doors, and once we adjust the adjusters at the bottom of the doors on the wheels, we can lift the doors sufficiently to lose that unsightly gap. Always read the small print on the items you're fitting before you start fitting them, otherwise you get yourself in a bit of a pickle, as I did yesterday, as I hadn't read the small print because I couldn't see it because it's too high up the door and I hadn't got my glasses on. So I picked the door up by its side, and this side came away and it dropped on my foot. Ow, 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 ouch, ouch, ouch. But luckily I survived and I'm okay. But when you lift them up, when you're unpacking them, just be careful not to damage the corners of the mirror doors, or to pick them up by the individual sides, because the weight of the door will pull the sides off if you're not careful. So when you lift them, hold both sides together, which is easy enough when you're using the 610mm wide doors. If you're not, then you definitely need two people. These are the top rail fittings on the back of the door. So that one, I don't know whether you can see, but there's a bit more silver below the black. And that one I've pushed gently up into the channel, and it goes click, and then you know it's secure. And then this one is one that I haven't done yet, but basically having got the wheels in the bottom channel in the correct channel, then this one here, focus it in a little bit more for you, just basically just push that gently up, get it into the right position, and then click. That's all you do. It's a very gentle sort of click, so you don't have to be very heavy-handed about it. And then that's reasonably secure. And then gradually, when we adjust the wheels at the bottom of the door, or the screws in those adjusters in the bottom of the door, you can see the black holes, and I think it's probably the one on the left which gives you access to the screw, and then you just screw those down and get the door to the correct level and alignment. And then on the front you can possibly just see the flag. I don't know whether you can. There's a little sort of grey flag there poking out. So what you do is you turn that round once you've got them in the correct alignment, push it down into the channel, and then you turn it back again to that existing position that it is now. This is the back of the door, and this is the top rail fixing, and you can see that there's a gap, a little bit of silver exposed in this area here, which was where this started off. And then basically what I've done is I've pushed it up into alignment with the channel there, and just got just a gentle little slightly more of a push, little gentle push when it goes click, and then you know it's then securely in the track. Once these are clicked in, they can still move up, so it allows the room for the movement when you adjust the wheels at the bottom. Right, so these are the fittings at the top of the door. You can see there's a bit of a metal gap showing when you unwrap the doors. That the black piece up there will be down at the bottom there. So basically what you do is get the black piece aligned with the top slot, in or outer depending on which channel you're going to run the doors in, and then you just literally gently push that black piece up into the slot, and then just give it another slight further click, push and click, and then that locks it in position. You do that on both sides of each door. So this is the timber stud-work that I set up to level out the ceiling. As you can see, both ends of the ceiling, there's probably about 18-20 mm of gap at the top there, and probably more like 25-30 mm there, and yet in the centre it's absolutely tight. So there's obviously a bit of sag in the old Victorian ceiling. The stud works about sort of 500 centres, and I've made it out of 100 by 50 mm kiln dried timber, and then I've screwed and plugged it into the side walls for stability, and also screwed it into the ceiling joist through that top rail there, and then the top rail of the sliding mirror fronted doors has been attached to that stud work. And now what I'm going to do is to cover that with plasterboard, and then it can either be skimmed by a plasterer, or probably more likely what I will do is I will paper it with a thick lining paper and then paint it, and hopefully you'll have a very similar effect. Right, we're now going to cover up the timber stud work at the top of the wardrobes here that we put in earlier to level up the ceiling, and we're going to put right, we're going to now fill in the stud work at the top here with 12.5mm plasterboard, grey side, I say grey, side without the lettering on it towards you, because that's the side that you would normally plaster. It normally says on the board which side is the side you do and don't plaster, so just have a look out for that. And to work out the size, what we've done is we've measured the gap between about the centre point of that little noggin there, from there to the wall here, and then on this end here we've taken the measurement there up against the wall down to about the bottom of the timber work, the stud work there, and that measurement there is the measurement we have used on the far right hand end of the plasterboard here, making sure that we keep a nice neat clean machined edge of plasterboard underneath, because then that'll keep everything a bit tidy when we put it up on the wall. So that is the measurement there, and then what we've got to decide is where the change in the angle of the dangle comes, and I think it's roughly speaking about there. So that measurement between there and there, yep, just checking the camera's still on, and that measurement between there and the bottom of the timber there is the same. So what we then do is to measure probably from the wall end. So we measure from the wall end to wherever the change in where the angle starts to come into play, and we draw a line on our plasterboard, and then we then take a line on the plasterboard between that point, roughly speaking, there, which is this pencil mark on the board here, between there and our longer mark here. So basically that is about 9.5 inches in old money, and that is about 8.25. So what we do is we run a sharp knife along the board and we follow the line along there, and then we split it in half, and then we're now ready to put that up on the attach it with a few screws. I'm just going to put a few temporary screws in just to hold it, and then with this one we've done here, I don't know whether you can see that one, probably not that well, but there is still a little bit of a gap at the top here, but that will be fillable with decorator's cork, or certainly if we get it professionally plastered, then the plaster will be able to fill that gap without too much of a problem. I'll show you a little later on actually how to cut plasterboard, which is actually very much easier than it sounds. I'm just going to finally check that the doors are upright, which they are with the spirit level. This is a little dinky spirit level, but you could use a bigger one which is possibly a bit more accurate. And as that's now upright and the bottom rail is in the correct position, we're now just going to screw the screws that come with the rail are little tiny ones, about 12mm or so, round heads. So if you use those, then hopefully it shouldn't puncture any pipes or any wiring that might be lurking underneath the floorboards. That's it. So I just do that all the way along the line. Probably the centres of the screws are probably about 600mm centres, but that should be perfectly adequate to hold this in position, because the weight of the doors will hold it down to the floor. It's just really a matter of stopping it sliding from side to side. The other thing to be mindful of is that, as you can see here, that the doors come out slightly proud of the bottom rail. So the idea would be to cut the carpet back a little bit, or sometimes when people fit the bottom rail they put a bit of 3/4 inch or 18mm hardwood, or softwood if you like, underneath the rail, bottom rail, protruding out slightly, so as you've then got it comes back away from this, and then the carpet fitter can fit the carpet to that 18mm piece of timber, which then means that the doors don't snag on the edge of a thick pile carpet, or in this case it's quite a thick rug. Right, please excuse all the mess in the mirrors, but it just gives you an idea of how many tools you need to actually do some of these projects. So we've got the 5 doors in place now, and at the top I've now put in the plasterboard and screw that in with 30mm screws at about 500-600mm centres. You just got to screw the screws in just slightly deeper than the face of the plasterboard, because then if it is plastered, then the plasterer's float will go over it without catching and creating some nasty mess. So I'm hoping that we'll get a plasterer in to do some other work, so I'll leave that at the moment for him or her to do. And then if not, I sometimes use a thick lining paper to cover over plasterboard like that if it's just small areas, and then paint it with a couple of 3 coats of emulsion paint, and that normally creates quite a reasonable finish. But the beauty of this project is it creates a lot of storage space. It takes space off the room, but the mirrors do create the illusion of much more space. So you lose in one way, but you do gain in many others. And hopefully I'll show you the room when it is back to normal, and you'll see that there's very little left in the room, because most of it will be hidden behind the wardrobe doors. As hopefully you can see, I've now filled the heads where the screws went into the plasterboard to hold it in. As I said earlier, I recessed the heads just by 2 or 3 mil and then filled them with a bit of a lightweight filler and caulking around the edges of where it joins the ceiling and the walls. And then what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to put a thick 1200 lining paper on there and then just paint it, because I don't think I'm going to have a plasterer here for a while, and that I'm sure will look fine. I've now sanded down the filler and put the lining paper on, and I've now created that crease in the joint between the top of the wardrobe and the ceiling with the end of a pair of scissors, done carefully, and now I'm going to trim it off with a sharp knife. If you do it very gently with a very sharp knife, you should be okay, but just make sure you go steadily, because otherwise you'll snag the paper and it'll end up all bunched up. So the half round or sort of curved blade knives are possibly slightly better because they don't dig in and tear hopefully quite so much. The other option with lining paper but not patterned paper is to mark the crease that you've created with the end of your scissors. Mark it with a pencil, and then if you ease the paper back slightly away from the ceiling and wall, and you can cut carefully along that line with a pair of sharp scissors, and then brush, or either use the papering brush or sponge to even the paper out again. The other option you can use for lining paper, but definitely not for patterned paper, is to draw a pencil line along that crease that you've made with the end of your scissors at the joint between the ceiling and the top of the wardrobe, and then cut it carefully with a sharp knife. The other option with lining paper, definitely not with patterned paper, is to run a pencil line along the crease that you've made at the junction with the ceiling that you made with your scissors, and then you can pull the paper carefully back a little way without pulling it right off, and then cut that carefully along there with a pair of sharp scissors, and then use your papering brush or your sponge to push it back into position. If the paste has dried out slightly along the edges, this is the time to go along the edge again with a small paintbrush dipped in your papering adhesive, and then just let that soak in for a few minutes, and then gently ease it back against the wall with your sponge or wallpapering brush. Good luck. These are our trusty group of tools: sponge and the wallpapering brush to push the paper into position and flatten out all the air bubbles and get it nicely in position. A long pair of sharp scissors, good pencil and a sharp knife. And then the little dish and the paintbrush at the back has got a little bit of wallpaper paste in it, and I use that for pasting the odd corner or odd edge which has maybe dried out too much, and you can just use that to get in along the edge, let it soak for a few minutes, and then push it back into position with either your sponge or your papering brush. Right, so this has now all been trimmed off. The joint there is, I've done it a little bit ragged, so then once it's all dried I'll just sand the edge of that. It's been butted together, but I'll just sand it off just to make it as smooth as possible, and then we'll put a couple of coats of paint on that. If the edge between the this panel and the ceiling there's a bit of a gap still, you can always put another thin application of decorator's cork along there and just level that out with a little spatula shaped a bit like your finger. And that lower edge there, what I'll probably do is use some 12mm 90-degree angle white UPVC stuck on with silicone or similar along that bottom edge, just to disguise the bottom edge of the plasterboard which is underneath. But it's a relatively inexpensive way of creating a panel, and hopefully once it's painted will look reasonably good. If you've got a plasterer coming in to do other jobs, then a plasterer will do a really fantastic job and relatively inexpensively if they're doing other things, but probably doesn't want to bring a plasterer in just to do that small area. On both bottom corners of each door is an adjuster. There are 3 holes, 2 there you see black, and then there's a silver screw which the screwdriver is sitting in the top of. And basically you use the screwdriver to adjust the height of the whichever corner of the door you want to adjust, either up or down. I think on the instructions it says turn it clockwise to make it go up and anti-clockwise to make it go down, but I think I found it worked the opposite way around, which is surprising because I would have thought the instructions would have been accurate, but it may be just me. I don't know whether you can see that there's a little grey flag there, and that's the anti-jump mechanism. So if you pull that little flag out gently, just pull that out gently, then what you can do is, once you've adjusted the doors and they're nicely in alignment, if you then, I'll come around this way but you might see better, there's that little grey flag which was flat against this mechanism here, but what I've done is I've moved it out so as it's come right out at 90 degrees to where it was before, and then what you do is you press that down into the track when you've got the doors in proper alignment, and then you turn it back, against the mechanism again like that, so it's flat so as the doors can run past each other, and then that will stop the door jumping out. Now the flag is back tight against the mechanism, so then the doors can go past each other. So make sure your flag is in the open position, i.e. at 90 degrees to where it is now, and then as long as it's in the correct alignment in its little channel that the flag lives in, you should then be able to press it firmly down into the channel and then fold the flag back in against the mechanism so as the doors can pass each other, and then that will hopefully stop the doors jumping out. You do that on both corners of each door, but only once you've got the doors in alignment, having used your trusty screwdriver with in this case a PH3 head, and all should be fine.